Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. Imagine trying to physically pick up and throw a literal refrigerator. Got it? Now, imagine that refrigerator is a 300-pound, highly trained professional athlete who actively really doesn't want to be thrown. Today, we're diving into a level of dominance that, frankly, just defies logic. We're looking at Teddy Riner, the absolute, undisputed king of judo. But we're not just going to sit here and count his Olympic medals. No, we're going to measure his legendary grappling superiority directly against the absolute peak of elite MMA. We're putting the tatami and the octagon side by side to see exactly how terrifyingly efficient Riner truly is.
So, here's our game plan for today. We'll kick things off with a statistical provocation, take a hard look at the heavyweight takedown ceiling, break down the actual mechanics of his 90% success rate, bridge the gap between the tatami and the octagon, and finally crown the ultimate takedown artist. All right, part 1, the statistical provocation, defying grappling logic. Let's completely upend how we usually think about elite dominance, all right? Is the king of judo actually the most dangerous takedown artist on the planet? I know, it sounds like massive hyperbole. But when you actually measure this Olympic legend against the baddest men inside the UFC Octagon, the math tells a story that makes elite MMA wrestlers look entirely different. 90%. Just let that sink in for a second. In almost any elite sport, a 50 or 60% success rate puts you straight into the Hall of Fame. But a 90% throw success rate against world-class opposition, that's literally like a basketball player shooting 90% from half court. It's a total statistical anomaly. While top-tier MMA wrestlers are out there struggling to land even half of their takedown shots, Riner is just cruising with this staggering consistency. Seriously, imagine a fighter who can toss 300-pound giants around like they're toddlers. The sheer magnitude of that math is absolutely mind-bending. And this sets the baseline of his dominance. We're not just talking about some brief flash-in-the-pan peak here. He had an absolutely unbelievable 154-match winning streak, an unprecedented career win percentage. But here's the real kicker, the 2024 Paris Olympic data. In combat sports, athletes almost always decline as they age, right? The physical wear and tear just adds up. But despite his veteran status, Riner's scoring efficiency actually hit a career peak in Paris. He isn't just maintaining his dominance, he's mathematically improving. The sheer volume and frequency of his scoring are just completely unique in the combat sports world.
Moving on to part 2, the heavyweight takedown ceiling, giants in the octagon.
To truly appreciate what Riner is doing, let's look at the absolute best in modern MMA right now. Guys like John Jones and Tom Aspinall. The current UFC heavyweight wrestling data shows us that even these incredible, truly elite wrestlers struggle to crack a 50% takedown success rate. The statistical ceiling in the octagon is demonstrably lower. So you might be wondering, why the massive gap? Well, if you've ever watched a cage fight, you know the environment changes everything. On the tatami, you have grip fighting, a super high volume of attacks, and a really fast pace. But in the octagon, traditional wrestling efficiency gets heavily suppressed. You've got the literal physical friction of the cage wall, the constant looming threat of getting punched in the face, which completely alters your posture, by the way, and a much slower, more methodical pacing. Which brings us to what we call his impenetrable base. When you look at the defensive metrics, heavyweight MMA fighters, despite all their specialized wrestling training, are actually statistically way more prone to being taken down than Riner is over on the tatami. It's honestly as if his center of gravity is just bolted to the floor. His base completely defies modern grappling logic.
All right, part 3, mechanics of the 90%, leverage over power.
So, how exactly does he achieve this? How does he get leverage over raw power? Well, it all starts with kazushi. If you take away anything from this explainer today, remember this word. Kazushi is the fundamental judo art of off-balancing an opponent before you ever even attempt the throw. Riner doesn't just walk up and try to deadlift these massive guys. No, he systematically short-circuits their balance first, which basically renders all their weight and strength completely useless. Here's the exact 3-step blueprint of how he operates. First, he forces entries from entirely neutral positions using his elite grip fighting. Second, he applies that kazushi we just talked about to completely shatter his opponent's center of gravity. And finally, he executes his signature throws, like the harai goshi, which is a sweeping hip throw, or the uchimata, an inner thigh throw. The physics of these specific moves prove that he's relying on superior mechanical leverage, not just raw heavyweight power. It is an absolute masterclass in physics. But wait, there's an equally fascinating mental layer to all of this. The psychological impact of Reiner's defensive stats is just massive. His base is so impenetrable, and his counters are so devastatingly quick that his rivals literally choose to take a disadvantage. Imagine being so terrified of a counterattack that you purposely let your opponent win the positioning battle. That's wild. He is mentally defeating these guys before he even grabs them.
Part 4. Bridging Tatami and Octagon, a theoretical match hope.
Now for the fun part. This is where we conceptually drop Teddy Riner directly into the UFC cage to see exactly how these skills would theoretically translate. Modern MMA defense is pretty much built around stopping the double leg and the single leg takedown. Fighters are explicitly trained to sprawl and defend the hips. But Reiner's arsenal? It bypasses that entirely. He uses a clinch-heavy style with forced upper body entries by manipulating the gi or, in an MMA context, controlling the neck and shoulders with over-unders and collar ties. He completely short-circuits the traditional takedown defense you see in the cage.
And think about the cage itself for a second. In the UFC, heavyweights rely heavily on cage wall walking to escape and get back to their feet. But pit that against Reiner's elite off-balancing, that kazushi. Wall walking requires a highly stable center of gravity so you can push off the fence. If Riner is constantly breaking your balance with trips and upper body manipulation, that defensive wall walking technique becomes incredibly, almost impossibly difficult to execute.
And we're not just guessing here either. Recent crossover training data actually confirms the viability of this style. We've seen elite judoka successfully integrate these trip-heavy, clinch-based games into professional cage fighting, and they completely neutralize standard wrestlers. The data strongly suggests that Reiner's specific brand of grappling is basically tailor-made to be an absolute nightmare for traditional wrestlers in the octagon.
And finally, Part 5. The ultimate takedown artist, redefining dominance.
So, what does this all mean when we put the pieces together? The 90% success rate, the unprecedented win streaks, the perfect leverage, the way his style completely counters modern MMA defense. The conclusion is pretty undeniable. Teddy Reiner's unbelievable statistical output firmly establishes him as the most efficient takedown artist alive today. And, across absolutely any combat sport, period.
I really love this quote from our source material because it just frames his legacy so perfectly. Teddy Riner transcends being just a judo icon. With a 90% success rate against the absolute best grapplers in the world, he is truly a universal master of human displacement. Just think about that phrasing for a second. He moves 300-pound men exactly where he wants them, exactly when he wants to. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Based on all the stats and the mechanics we've just laid out, how would a prime Teddy Riner disrupt the current wrestling heavy meta of the MMA heavyweight division? If those giant UFC fighters struggle to even hit a 50% takedown rate, what happens when a literal 90% statistical anomaly steps into their world? It completely shatters how we think about grappling dominance. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep questioning the stats.